Great. Hello, and welcome to Filecoin Core Devs call number 56, which is also doubling as an avenue for us to have the hybrid soft consensus discussion for the FIP 56. My name is Lucky Nwachukwu, and I am I'm at the Filecoin Foundation as the governance project manager. The time now is around 12:02 Eastern time. I don't know what time it is, wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome. On the agenda today, we have obviously welcoming all of us, the next lineup would be the FIP 56 hybrid soft consensus deliberations, looking at the overview of the deliberations, the discussions, and next steps. We will also have technical discussions from, what happened? Sorry about that. Yeah, technical discussions. I think Nemo is facilitating that on Windows Post Grindability Fix. We'll look at NV19, FIP scope, and timelines, and take additional Q&A. Thank you so much for joining us. And with that, I'll be passing it over to Caitlin.
Sweet, thanks, Lucky. Next slide, please. All right. So the question at the top of the hour is really about FIP 56 and what is it that we should do with it, right? So a little bit of brief background for everyone. We have been deliberating this across the Filecoin community for the last several months. And we unfortunately, through our soft consensus processes, which work well for some FIPs, we have not been able to reach clear community consensus as to what to do with this one in particular. FIP 56 is a crypto economic FIP, which means that there are some complexities to it that I think all of us are very well versed in at this point. And what we've asked core devs to help with today is to holistically assess all of the conversations that have happened around this FIP to date, to think to the community conversations that you've had, the feedback that you've heard, and also the technical reviews that you've done of this FIP, to help assess whether it is in the best interest of the network to accept or reject the FIP. This is not standard practice for us. This is something that we have asked core devs to do because we think it is in the best interest of the Filecoin community for there to be a decisive answer as to whether or not we are moving forward with a sector duration multiplier in the next network upgrade. And for that reason, I really appreciate all of you coming today, especially if you're in really disadvantageous time zones. We have sent around guidance document prior to this, just for quick reference. Here is a link to the guidance document for core devs, and here is a link to the high-level decision doc that the Filecoin Foundation put together. These have already been shared. If you haven't looked at them yet, now's maybe not the time, but they are relatively short, so maybe scan through them. We will also be sharing these with Filecoin community members, as well as a recording of this call and all meeting minutes like we always do, so please keep that in mind. And I want to very quickly talk through what we expect this process to look like today, right? So we are going to discuss this question. Everyone is welcome to speak, but do know that you are not obligated to do so. Danny from the Filecoin Foundation has offered to join us as a co-facilitator. I have this awkward role of being both a facilitator of this conversation, but also a core dev. So Danny has agreed to step in only if I end up sort of giving up my neutrality in my position and talking about a certain perspective one way or the other on the FIP. To that end, again, this is really oriented around a soft consensus process. We also want to respect the fact that core devs have various roles in this ecosystem and may not feel comfortable giving their personal opinions on the FIP, casting a vote, or anything of this type. So we are asking this group to reach soft consensus, much like what we typically task the Filecoin community with. Soft consensus is a process that's pretty common for open source organizations and different types of political organizations also, and it really refers to the feel of the room. It's kind of this wishy-washy thing that can be difficult to ascertain, which is partially why we are all here today. But what I really want to call out is that if we do not end this conversation with a really clear sense that this FIP should either be accepted or rejected, we will default to the conservative choice of rejecting this FIP. So again, there will not be a vote taken. We are not going to ask you to say yay or nay if you do not feel comfortable doing so. We do ask you to participate in the conversation and to feel comfortable sharing what, again, you believe is the best interest of the network. Again, I'll be the primary facilitator, but Danny is here as backup just in case. Danny, do you have anything you want to say?
No, not really. Usual apologies for this being the longest 3-line diff code review in, well, I'm not even going to say in history, but happy to help in any way. For those of you who don't know, I'm with the Filecoin Foundation. I'm senior fellow. I've seen other situations from the W3C to other organizations go through soft consensus. So I have some experience of the process and happy to help where I can.
Cool, thanks, Danny. And for anyone who doesn't know, Danny has been a faithful and very neutral steward of both all of the feedback processes we led after FIP 36 and also during the recent FIP 56 community AMA. And we flagged this for core devs earlier this week, whether it'd be any issue for him to join us as co-facilitator, and no one raised any. So with that, again, this is really just a conversation, so we will kick it off. We have reviewed the FIP many, many times, and I want to first start just by opening the floor to see if there's any starting comments that anyone wants to offer the group. And we will be sitting in these uncomfortable pauses. But again, do not feel obligated to be the first.
I'm happy to be the first to kick things off. I think that my short answer to the question on the slide is that it should be rejected. As not a position I hold very strongly, but just kind of along the axes that you were talking about of the technical details of the FIP itself, community sentiment, and then kind of the should we do this or not. From a technical perspective, I have no concerns. I think the proposal makes sense, and I don't see any risks from that. Steb inherited kind of the implementation of it a couple of weeks ago, and he and I have kind of worked through it. I haven't fully reviewed the PR yet, but no concerns there. From the community sentiment, it looks like we're divided, but it does seem like the majority falls closer to disapproval than approval, which is mostly what guides my nudge towards no. And the last thing I'll say is I think I do worry that we kind of run a risk from a governance and community security perspective almost with this FIP. We haven't had as contentious a FIP reach this stage before, except perhaps with FIP 36, but that was a clear decision as well. I do worry that if we accept this FIP in its with the kind of divided stage that we're at, we do run the risk that some community members simply choose to not participate or fork off of Filecoin as a result of that, or that I think that's less likely, but the what I'm more concerned about is just damage to kind of the reputation of our governance process. I think it would feel like we are going ahead with a FIP that is fairly unwanted by the community, and I personally don't think we should be doing that, which is why I lean towards no here.
Molly, you want to jump in? Thanks, Ayush.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Yush. I also agree that from the varying different community participation groups, we have a number of different stakeholders across the Filecoin network and folks who hold different roles within the network. And I think we've seen relatively low engagement from a number of communities that I would generally expect to be very much in favor of this FIP, including clients and token holders. And we've seen, I think, relatively strong negative feedback from at least a subset of storage providers, and then a number of others in the storage community who are either neutral or maybe slightly positive, but there's definitely clear contention in that community, I believe. Personally, I think that a number of those concerns come from either misunderstandings or misinformation, maybe intentional, maybe not unintentional misinformation about those situations. However, I haven't seen a change in that community's alignment and sentiment since efforts to help alleviate that misinformation and bring a lot more information into the decision-making process so that groups could see how the FIP could be net beneficial for them, net beneficial for the entire network, and for all of the stakeholders in the network. And so given that I haven't seen a change in that community sentiment, and it might be that that change is there, but hasn't been communicated. But given that I haven't seen it, I don't think that we have the data that there is enough alignment from the community overall. And because there isn't also enough strong participation from other community stakeholders, say, clients or token holders or many other builders or ecosystem developers or others being strongly in favor of this FIP, I don't think that we net have strong enough alignment across the community, even if there are some naysaying voices, which again, soft consensus does not mean that you get held hostage by one party in the network being like, screw you, I don't want this, so therefore I can hold everyone hostage and making any sort of improvement. But again, I don't think we have enough alignment, and I agree with Ayush's position that I don't think the FIP has generated enough broad community support in order to be accepted within our governance process. And so I think it should be rejected. It does not match my personal feeling for what the FIP should be and what is best for the Filecoin network. But that's what I think is appropriate for our governance process.
Thanks, Molly. Stab, you're the next on the list of the hand up.
Good. So to give I guess an implementation perspective on this, it's relatively straightforward. The FIP is relatively straightforward. Unfortunately, it does add some technical debt, and it's actually been quite frustrating the way it adds this, because in the past we've only had one opportunity to change power of sectors, and that was you snap a deal or you replace a CC sector. This adds multiple points, and the way it handles that is the FIP itself actually just hand waves everything. It doesn't really specify what should happen here. So we implemented it. We had to try to figure out how to make this work, and the resolution is not great. It basically takes a maximum of a bunch of different penalties over time to try to try to avoid ways in which you can game the system to reduce your penalties. But this is just technical that I'd rather not take on. I'd rather find a better solution for this. In terms of process, I think going forward we need to adjust to how we handle the implementation of FIPS. This shouldn't have been a one team proposes it, someone else that goes and implements it. There should have been more of a collaborative process of like, hey, I have this idea. Everyone works together to figure out, okay, how do we find compromises to make something that everyone's okay with? And then we work together to actually find implementation. Then we finally go back to the FIP. This felt very much like, oh, here's a FIP, and then we go try to implement it. A lot of people are objecting to the FIP as it was written. Yeah, I don't know. This is not the way I would like to see this happen in the future.
Yeah, I think this is a really good thing to point out. And I also want to elaborate a little bit on this, in particular, because this is a recorded meeting. Typically, the way that we have handled this trade-off, right, is that in the past, there has been really close collaboration between FIP authors and implementers, in part because a lot of FIP authors were also implementers. And as that dual role separates, which is a good thing, right, that shows growth in this process, that more people are involved and more people are writing FIPs. This is a coordination challenge that we do need to solve. In the past, what we have allowed is that as long as there has not been an actual change to the stated policy of the FIP, that the spec can change in order to accommodate needs around implementation to ensure that the FIP has been accepted, we're not going to introduce some kind of security issue or sort of uncertain technical choice in favor of keeping things static. So again, this requires a judgment call. And if you go back to the FIP Slack channel, you can see places where we have debated this, sometimes in really granular detail. But I think with FIP 56, it's sounding like consensus is moving towards a rejection, in which case this is not going to be an issue. Should the sentiment of the room change significantly, and we do accept, I think it is worth noting that we should be really, really careful about how we accept any additional changes for implementation to the FIP. Not because we haven't passed or anything, but because community members are uncomfortable with some of what this FIP proposes. That feedback from community members has been quite negative. And we want to make sure it doesn't look like the FIP is being changed after the fact, so to speak. We want to be really clear about those changes. And Steb, I saw the PR that you opened this morning. Seems pretty straightforward. But I do want to flag that this is something that we should be aware of. Jennifer?
Yeah, just quickly follow up on what Katie said. I 50% disagree a little bit because I do think this particular FIP, if we if FIP authors did engage with implementers a little bit earlier, we could have found a lot of the design gap, as Deb like mentioned earlier in the days, including like the termination fees, like the collateral, like the penalty and stuff that can resolve some of the feedback and gap that block science actually pointed out like very late in the process. And I do think with the expertise from the implementers, we could have helped design and propose a better FIP in a way that may help with driving community consensus a little bit more, but that's just a slight like call. On this question particularly, I personally would also suggest we reject this FIP, agreeing basically everything like Molly, Ayush, and Steph has already called out. For me, it's like I had earlier in the community engagement process, I actually know a couple community storage providers do want SDN as a concept. They do think potentially we can have a sector duration multiplier incentive for them to commit like longer sectors and like show the longer commitments with the network. How we did it is a little bit questionable, like a lot of questions around multipliable like QAPs and stuff like that, which is a turn off for some other storage providers. And that's one of the major failure on this like driving consensus perspective. At one point, I do think we should have just like landed in the network and see where the adoption goes, because one of the goals is to also incentive people that has experienced sectors in the upcoming months to extend them longer, so that the network still have those sectors for security reasons and also for data for the later on when the demand is driving up. We don't. However, to me, we failed to gather like strong user data points to like justify that people will actually extend those sectors, and they will actually use that feature instead of like committing new sectors. So that's one like major piece from a point stand of view that's like we were missing, and also the reason why I personally don't feel like strongly that we should push for acceptance for this particular FIP at the moment. There's one more point in my brain, but like I kind of just like blank out like suddenly. But like in general, based on everything just being said, to help with facilitating our governance process, I do think we need stronger engagement and better moderation when in the future for like driving consensus across like community key stakeholders early in the days. To help with the governance process. This whole thing lasts like 8 months. Is way too long. It wastes a lot of like energy. We could have done a lot of other things. So like I think that's one improvement we can making. I'm also okay with rejecting this for now and maybe revisit that in 6 months, just because I know there's some concerns on the collateral on like from storage provider. They are not gonna get enough collateral to actually commit towards like the longer QAP. I know there are a couple, that's not an issue just with regarding this FIP, that's a general issue that Filecoin ecosystem network has today. I know there's a couple like FIPs that's coming. One is called the short-form network collateral thing that folks should take a look at that can potentially mitigate this concern a little bit over the next couple months. And once that concern is out, maybe storage provider will feel more comfortable to open to the idea to have a longer sector duration incentive, and maybe we can revisit that like later on. But at the moment, I do think it's the right choice to reject it for now.
Shyam?
As a member of the Crypto Econ Lab who was not, listed, who was not an author of this FIP and was not directly involved in it, my personal stance is that there are clear advantages to this Filecoin improvement proposal, and it takes us, one step closer towards the goal of Filecoin, which is to have like, reliable and useful data stored on the network. And just a couple of points in the governance perspective. So I guess my personal stance on this is that sometimes it's important to, look at the bigger picture as to what is good for the network. And I would like to cite one instance where, in the Ethereum community, when EIP 155.9 was, initially proposed, there was such strong backlash to it that there was also a risk that the chain would be forked. but then the community still, the developers still went on to accept that upgrade because they had in mind what was best for the network and what was needed at that point in time. And a second note is that I feel that the FIP has changed a lot since its initial form, and to exactly account for what the community wants and the perspective that the community has given. So from my point of view, my personal stance would be inclined towards an acceptance of this FIP.
Axel?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I just want to push back a bit on an idea that was now talked by Stephen and Jenny, and then also Einort in the comments, that I generally disagree that we should place a higher bar on like meeting some implementation standards before publishing a FIP. In a sense that this is kind of a luxury that we as like PL team members can afford, that we have everything. Okay, so I have this idea, let me talk with the engineers and figure out. I want FIPs to be available to any Filecoin user on the internet that has much fewer resources and maybe has no idea how to implement on Lotus, but has a economic idea that can be viable. And I want that idea to make it to a FIP, and they may have no idea how to implement this. And I mean, I get it. It will make job a lot convenient if like everyone helps out in the. I know engineers are like have a lot of work and a lot of demand, but I just don't want to raise the bar to entry for FIPS in this way. And just a second point I want to make kind of independent is maybe a soft critique about soft consensus moving forward, in the sense that I think, I mean, so FIP 36 and FIP 56 are kind of starting to show us that so soft consensus has some limitations, in the sense that through soft consensus, which it's unclear what it means, but it's like generally it's obvious to see that everyone is in agreement. That can only work for like easy small FIPs that everyone and so in the future we may need to make some stronger, maybe more difficult decisions for the network. And if the approach we're going to take moving forward is only soft consensus, I don't think any such decisions could be made moving forward. So yeah, that's all.
I want to say I fully agree with you. There is a huge component of FIP 56, which is about governance. And I think those conversations are very necessary and very important. Within the scope of the hybrid soft consensus process, let's try and keep it focused on the context of this FIP in particular. If we want to, at the end of this call, though, I'd be happy we should have plenty of time in Q&A also to talk about the specifics of the soft consensus process. But I don't want to speak for everyone, and I don't want to commit us to anything, but I think it's generally understood that soft consensus has value in certain contexts and very strong limitations in others. So your point is very much heard, and I think broadly representative of how a lot of folks feel, including myself. Stephen hasn't spoken yet. Stephen, you want to go?
I spoke earlier, but I have to respond to that point. In terms of implementation, my objection is not that this proposal was made by non-engineers. My objection is that it was completely formed. Oh, different Stephen, sorry.
It's all right, Steph, keep going.
Okay, but my objection was that it was basically completely formed and then tossed over the fence. And that's just not how this should be done. It was frustrating trying to implement it, trying to get feedback, trying to figure out how to do it, and had been basically pushed all the way to the end before it actually went through the implementation. That just doesn't work. Like that cannot scale because it wasn't actually implementable as it was proposed. In the implementation, needed to change a bunch of details of how it worked. But it felt very difficult. Like basically, by the time it got to the implementation stand or the implementation point, like it felt like there wasn't room to adjust the FIP itself to meet the realities. So, for example, like the way the FIP was actually implemented, snapping a new sector resets the sector duration multiplier, which means that if you tried to snap a deal onto a sector that was small enough, you might actually lose power, which would disincentivize people from snapping sectors, which is something we don't want to have happen. It's stuff like that that was very frustrating. That's all I want to say out there.
Good for the record. Thanks, Deb. Stephen Lee from ipfs Force.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, I was on mute. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm not. And I don't want to discuss about the consensus, the hybrid consensus, but I want to discuss about. Yeah, there are so many discussions and disagreement of this this fake way, and somebody mentioned that there might be some misunderstanding of the information, and also perhaps information alignment issue. I'm kind of disagree about that. I think there are three things we should consider. One is about I think it's actually a disagreements of how to evaluate the network value. Actually, different group of people have different different method or different points of the whole Filecoin network value evaluation. Some people may more focus on the how much real data has been stored in the network, and many others will think about the raw bytes, and also some other people will think about the price of the token and many things, and also other people will think about how many people actually being involved or participated in the ecosystem. So there are many factors behind. From my point of view, I would think that we could consider the Filecoin network as a block box, and we see how many other parts, real world, connected with the network, including the data and also the people and also the machines and hardware capitals, and how much all of this connected to Filecoin network. And I would think the more the better. Okay, so I think perhaps we should have a discussion about how to evaluate network value. Okay, that may be helpful. This is one thing I'm thinking about. And another thing I'm thinking about is all of this actually behind this discussion, people are thinking more about the Filecoin Plus. So there are many arguments about this, disagreement about the Filecoin Plus, and we have the notaries, we have 4 core heads of the notaries. We have even more than 100 notaries, and we have a very big plan for all of this. But many people think that we are not very successful on this. Is because how about the quality, okay, and of the real data, and also the collusion and also the corruption between the notary and the storage providers, something like that, and also so how could we have real good quality of the real data, and to have the quality evaluation by the network? It is very hard, and I know that we have been working very hard to drive this, but and as you could think about this, so if the network capacity, I mean, yes, real data. If a network with about 300 petabytes of real data storage versus of 600, okay? So what's the difference? Yeah, if in real world, that will make very huge difference of the network value evaluation. But in Filecoin network, so yeah, you could say that from 300 petabytes to 700 petabytes, there is almost no difference. Okay. So what's wrong there? Yeah, I mean, how people evaluate the network value. Value. So this is the second thing I'm thinking about is about the Filecoin Plus, about real data storage in Filecoin network. So the third thing I would think that for the core dev team, I would think that how could we avoid this kind of discussing, this kind of misagreement, this kind of consensus we cannot achieve. So I would really like we do something to simplify the layer one and to have all this evaluation or different points to higher level. So we don't need to have this kind of discussion. Anybody want to implement one idea, they could do that. Okay, so to have the community or market to evaluate their the change of value, the value of change or the value of evaluation. So we don't need to discuss all of this. So that means that we need to do something very soon, immediately to change this kind of architecture. Okay, to avoid this kind of discussion on the really on the layer one very lower layer. So move this to higher layer, and we could relieve all of that from this just kind of frustrating discussing. Okay.
Thank you, Stephen. Oh, anything else to add?
No.
Molly.
I was going to respond maybe more to some of the stuff that Shyam had mentioned, but maybe I'll just respond immediately to Stephen because I had maybe some data points there. Like I think Filecoin has a whole host of like ways of assessing like the value of the network, and a lot of those are highlighted when people talk about Filecoin, like talking about the amount of like storage hardware it has amassed and put to work within the network, the utilization of that storage hardware. I would disagree that people's assessment of Filecoin hasn't changed as like the amount of data stored on the network has grown. Like, sure, we have other conflating signals at the same time, like economic collapses and banks collapsing and all sorts of fun, exciting things. But like, I absolutely do think that the amount of useful data stored on the network is a very, very valuable and very important signal for Filecoin. If we don't achieve that, then we're just another Chia, and that's like not what we're here to do. And I think even more important than the amount of data is also the success cases and the proof points of real high value clients in the world who are using Filecoin to store useful data and highlighting those as case studies that others can learn from and emulate and follow, which is less of a KPI and more of a like, it's more of a thing that you would browse through to understand, say, how CERN or how the New York Public data sets or the USC Shoah Foundation or XYZ different groups, Internet Archive are utilizing the network. And I think those do carry a lot of weight. And I wouldn't conflate like crypto token prices with the value being created by the network. I just unfortunately do not think those things are going to correlate in a moment by moment perspective. And I would not judge the impact of our work 100% in those worlds because there's lots of correlation that happens between all sorts of different networks. So I would just disagree that that's a valuable or that is the sum total or way that we can assess whether we're making impact and making the network better. And I would also point out, from my vantage point at least, I have seen a number of like specific misconceptions, like I don't like this proposal. I think it's going to be negative for the raw byte power in the network. And then you have both CryptoEcon Lab and Block Science agreeing and like creating analyses that point out, no, SDN is going to be, based on our modeling, based on our assessment, the hypothesis it is going to be net better for things like raw byte power in the network. And so this was an argument that was used against the FIP, which was disproven. And from my vantage point, I still hear that argument coming from some storage providers. And so like, I think there is still misinformation about the potential values of this FIP. But again, it doesn't change my assessment of what is the correct governance decision in this moment in time, because the way to work through that governance issue is through having an informed public who can go through soft consensus. And we have tried as a network to improve the knowledge and understanding of our participating community. And I completely agree with you. There are challenges with things like Phil Plus, and I think those are very valid, and that I don't agree with everyone's take on the right solution there. Some people are great, just like there should be no incentives for storing data in Filecoin. We should just be proof of work. But I think I would put that aside. Like, I think there are good examples of specific misconceptions, and I do think that I agree with some of the broader points you're making. There are lots of different parties in the network who weight those ways of valuing network output differently. And I think, one of the things we're trying to do is make sure that we represent those correctly. And despite, I think a number of folks here having deeper or having an understanding of a lot of having spent the time to dispel a number of those misconceptions, I just don't think that we have the governance process here to move forward with this FIP, given that we still have a very divided community, from my vantage point at least, or non-participating or divided. And I think if we had more broad participation from a number of other community parties, like clients and token holders and other, that we might be in a different place. I think maybe it was Shyam who pointed out there was debates within the Ethereum community about moving to proof of stake. That was a massively contentious decision, but there were a number of different stakeholder groups across the Ethereum ecosystem who all came together and were able to be like, nope, there are going to be some groups in this network who disagree and are looking out for their own interests and aren't looking out for the broad interests of the network and are not positive on it. But it required the whole network community coming together to be supportive. And where we don't see that engagement and support from other parties in the network, we don't see a strong positive support there. I don't think that the core dev community being positive on this FIP is sufficient.
I think that is a really helpful summary of a lot of the sort of input that I've heard from a lot of other folks as well. And so I just want to time check. We have about 20 more minutes for this conversation. There's a lot to discuss around FIP 56. I think Stephen highlighted it really well. Molly gave a really good summary. So I am more than happy for us to continue this conversation up until we switch to the next topic. But I do want to say that from my perspective, it does seem to be quite clear that as a group, we seem to be pretty much in alignment about rejecting this FIP. And to the points made earlier, again, that does not mean that everyone necessarily agrees with that, but it seems like we are choosing to prioritize the capacity of governance and community feedback, regardless of the type or the flavor of it, over what we may believe is a solid technical proposal. If you disagree very strongly, now would be a good time to let us know. Otherwise, I think the next person with the hand up is Kieran. Kieran, you want to weigh in?
Sure. So I think Molly kind of addressed some things that I was going to say the counterpoint to, but I'll just say it since I'm on the air now. So my personal opinion is that we should accept this FIP, but I understand, just to address kind of the governance perspective of it, this is just my personal perspective, is that I think we can assume that most people participating in the network are going to be pretty self-interested and push for decisions that are advantageous to their own personal economics rather than necessarily what's good for the network. And so as a general point, I understand that it would be nice if we could have a very informed public that can reach a soft consensus. I think that it would be very hard to do that in real life for any sort of proposal that goes beyond like, I mean, I don't know how, a good way to say this, but like trivial updates, like let me update the documentation to be better. You know, whenever there's economics involved, people are going to get real loud. And so I think from that perspective, we've acknowledged that like we don't have a lot of participation. And so, you know, I'm not going to suggest like maybe we should go get it or not, but the engagement that so the 2 points are, one, people are self-interested and are going to be loud. And 2, it's hard to educate the public. And 3, the engagement that we do have is from a very limited number of people on GitHub who are, I would say, completely in one camp, and they're not going to be convinced no matter what economics or analysis we ever put out. And so using that as our signal to make decisions on what 2 different independent consults have said is good for the network is a very kind of like, to me, seems like not, I mean, I understand both sides. So it just, my personal opinion is that it seems like a scary kind of decision to make based on that. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Kieran. Steph, do you have something quick to add?
Just quickly on the, I'm hearing a lot of talk of convincing people and explaining to people. I think one of the things that was missing here was more working with people. Like it's easier to get someone on board if you talk with them, make them feel like you're on their, like you're both in the same team, you're both trying to achieve the same thing. Because like I don't think a lot of people really objected to the core idea of rewarding longer term sectors more. But I think a lot of people did feel like they were kind of being handed down this thing, and that's where a lot of the contention came from. And I really want to push us towards more talking with people, working people, and again, less trying to explain, no, this is why this works this way.
I'm gonna abrogate some of my neutrality for a moment, and also would be happy to cede my facilitation to Danny if everyone else thinks that's appropriate. But I want to touch on that I very frequently hear from storage providers about this too. And I think Kieran is right? That it's usually safe to assume that most people are acting in their own self-interest, and there can sometimes be really loud voices whose loudness is proportional to their investment. But storage providers also see that of folks who are very involved in this process also. And I think that framing has helped create this sense of being unable to bridge this like communication chasm. There has been a lot of sort of misheard voices on both sides, which again, from the governance perspective, makes it very, very difficult to justify accepting this SIP. And I had a conversation with someone about this yesterday, right? Because there's always an argument, and I think it is a good one, that, if you really are trying to act in the best interest of the network, there comes times where, the democratic masses, perhaps, regardless of how flawed their methods of engaging may be, sometimes you need to overrule those in order to make a choice that is difficult, but is in the best interest of this mission that has brought us all together. Again, this is a very important argument, and it's one that comes up time and time again when trying to make governance decisions. But a framing that I thought was really interesting and very helpful in this context was that if we are going to apply a principle of precaution, as BlockScience did, or a conservative point of view in deciding what is best, and whether or not this sense of community preference to reject ought to be overruled, which I don't think anyone is advocating for, but I think it is worth including as part of this discussion. There is a logic here that says that what we really need to decide is that network conditions are objectively such that it is more of a conservative choice for us to accept and to force technical changes than it is for us to defer to what we are seeing as mass sentiment. And from my perspective in this case, where we really differ from other examples in Ethereum, et cetera, is that we're not seeing that that is the case. Yes, there are very strong economic headwinds that Filecoin has to navigate, but to choose to accept FIP56 from the perspective of maybe there were misinformation or miscommunication, or we haven't had robust enough community management in order to persuade folks that this is really important. I personally don't know if that's compelling, and I also believe we should reject this FIP. So I'm going to cede this to Danny to make the final call. Danny, I hope that's okay. Next in line to talk is Juan.
Hey everyone, I think I agree with a lot of the voices that have spoken up so far. I'm gonna the way that I think we should proceed, and I'll give a maybe dissenting opinion here to many folks. My perspective is that I agree with Kieran that as soon as there are economic changes, you will get primarily opposing viewpoints being very vocal. You might have some that will just end up in like high division where there are two very loud camps. But in general, you'll just get lots and lots of resistance because it is economically easier to preserve status quos. And you will end up in situations where the protection of those conditions becomes the bigger, stronger argument. Also, I think it is the case that the level of economic changes that need to happen to Filecoin is so large and is going to be so large over the next few years. And we saw through FIP36 a large set of economic changes that got rejected. So then FIP56 greatly decreased the range of economic changes. FIP56 is way, way, way smaller compared to something of the magnitude of FIP36. And even that generated an enormous, extremely costly level of discussion and debate and so on. Like the level of collective investment in this discussion it has been so large that it makes me very negative on the outlook in general of Filecoin being able to implement the level of economic changes it needs to be successful in the long term. So what it really tells me is that either something like FIP56 is accepted and moves on, and the network moves into a mode of being able to change itself economically, or it likely will tend to ossify more and more with even smaller and smaller kinds of changes to the point where it's just not going to be able to make the economic adjustments it requires to be successful in the long term. So for that reasoning, from a long-term oriented, upgrade oriented perspective, my sense of precaution, like the precautionary principle perspective, is to accept this change that moves us and nudges us closer to where we should be economically, and sets us up in a good direction to accept even larger, much more significant economic changes that are going to come in the future. And so I think that unless the Filecoin network is able to greatly decrease the level of investment required to make these kinds of changes and makes these kinds of changes much faster, it is likely won't be successful in the long term.
Deep.
Sorry, I was going to speak from the angle of Phil Plus as opposed to respond to Juan's points. So I'm going to do that first. I'm on the core devs group primarily because of the work involved in the governance team and setting up and operating the Filecoin Plus program. In terms of this particular FIP and the discussion that's evolved around it, we've certainly taken a lot away from the discussion in the Filecoin Plus community. There have been several new discussions that have spawned as a result of the consideration of the sector duration multiplier and alternatives that have been proposed. And overall, I would say it's been an extremely healthy and good exercise for the Phil Plus community to be exposed to a bunch of this stuff and be forced to reconcile, some of the trends that we've observed, some of the changes that we're seeing, and really push ourselves in a direction where we're actively taking a stance on a lot of the topics that people are waiting for the community to take a harsher stance on. And so I think you, as a group, should look forward to much more active communication from the Filecoin Plus community on what we're doing in terms of this phase that we're entering, where we're going to be explicitly prioritizing quality and better estimating sizing in terms of utility of the program and like what we're hoping to achieve with operating a program at that high level. With regards to this FIP itself, we were able to run a poll within the community. I'm dropping results to a couple of graphs that we just put together with results from that poll. This is publicly viewable. You can take a look at it later as well. Mainly, we were looking at 4 different parameters. We wanted to see how notaries and highly engaged stakeholders in the community would vote or would want to show support for FIP 56, whether it's on the count of increasing collateral, on the count of increasing duration of deals, on the count of having a multiplier that multiplies with QAP specifically. So if you have a 10x QAP multiplier, then would you further compound that with sector duration? So going from 10 to a potential max of 20, let's say, as opposed to going like 10 plus 2 or any of the other alternatives that have been proposed. And then count of urgency of implementation, where there were some questions around, do we actually need to do this right now? Is this the right time in the network for it? We had about 36 respondents in the initial days after which the survey was run. This was about 2 weeks and some change ago, so before last call. And the majority sentiment across many of these is either neutral or some kind of supportive. And so overall, I find from the polling that we've done that less than 30-ish% of the community ends up coming underneath neutral, which is to say cautiously unsupportive, moderately unsupportive, or extremely unsupportive. And on that basis, as the person in the room that can also represent that voice, I find myself to be neutral or positive towards this FIP and support progressing with it.
Thank you, Deep. I think this may be the final word. Tom, you're up.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can be pretty quick, so maybe we can squeeze somebody else in. I would just say, explicitly weighing up the point that you made and the point that Juan made and Cheyenne of community risk versus inaction. I think we should move forward with this. I think the risk of inaction is being substantially underestimated. I think the risk to the community we should definitely consider, but it is primarily based on a relatively small minority of views, and those views have been based on some misconceptions. 3 main misconceptions that have been dispelled: that FIP 56 and 36 are the same, that FIP 56 excessively supports Phil Plus, and that CDM would boost raw power. Now, all of those things were completely shown to be false independently. So on the basis of that, I think we should support the FIP.
Thank you, Tom. And Vic?
I'll be very quick. I think there are a couple of things here that after hearing everyone speak, I'm curious to hear thoughts on. The first is we seem to be kind of like, we are doing kind of this soft consensus process within core devs because soft consensus wasn't reached in the community, and that's for a reason. So I don't think we should be deciding whether or not there is soft consensus in the community. I think we should, as core devs, be assessing what is best for the network. And I think maybe like it is inevitable that the reason we are here is because there is a small, or at least some population of vocally dissident individuals. If that was not the case, then this FIP would have passed, right? So then there's a second question, which is, what kind of precedent are we setting when it comes to governance risk or community risks? And I think there are 2 different precedents that people have isolated. The first is, we might be setting a negative precedent by accepting this FIP, given that there's a vocal minority. The second, though, is that we are also setting a precedent of not allowing for economic that technically have been audited and vetted by not just CEL, but other people like Block Science, et cetera, who have been very, very involved with Filecoin's economy over the course of its history and lifetime. And we are setting the precedent that vocal kind of minority, which we have also isolated to maybe be misinformed or not necessarily true to the intentions of what might be best for the network, has that ability to kind of act as a blocker, right? So that's also another dangerous precedent too, insofar as we've also heard from people like Deep and others that there is actually community sentiment outside of just the storage provider groups. And we have the data for that, rather than like some comments that are fairly, I guess, vitriolic on GitHub. So I think my overall assessment is that there's also a precedent being set in rejection too. And that precedent can be more dangerous than the one in which we have kind of established as technical implementers that this is not a sweeping economic change. It is, if anything, an incremental one. In reality, regardless of what folks in the community may say to block it. So that's kind of just like my general point as I view the way that we move forward when it comes to acceptance or rejections, or moving forward with the FIB.
Jenny.
And for what it's worth, if it wasn't clear, I think we should move forward and accept the FIB, but I think that was fairly clear.
I agree that the core devs should make the best decision for what the network doing. I personally do agree, but I personally think that what our user want is one thing that, is one of the things we should consider within what's the best for the network. When that downside of not listening to one of the major network participants, for example, storage provider community, and their concern, their needs will be some of them, we don't know if it's not going to happen or not. We cannot predict the future. But however, we do want to make sure that people will actually stay in the network and providing the storage the Filecoin now needed. That's why I think their voices are very important, and we should like listening into that. And I think because there's no strong push from the majority of the network user and participants, that's why I'm personally feel like, just because like all the analysis that CEL has been performing has a projection, the assumption that the storage onboarding is going to keep growing, and like, there's going to be a extension on some of the sectors, and that's how it's going to impact the network baseline and all the dynamic of the things, and which driven into the conclusion of SDM is a good thing for the network as a whole. I'm concerned if that assumption is wrong, it's the growth projection is actually not going to be the same, because storage provider actually don't want to participate in the SDM dynamic. That could be a potential risk for the network. Maybe not a risk for the network, but might be a no op for the network. In that sense, I would say not spending a lot of resources implementing that in the network sounds like a good choice to do for now.
I know we're pretty much at time for this discussion. Like I would take like Juan and Tom's comments to heart. Like, I do think that this proposal, like from my vantage point, from the data that Block Science and CEL and others have put forth, I think it's not good for Filecoin. I think it is going to be a rough ride for the network. I think a lot of storage providers are making the assumption like, great, A or B. I want B, therefore B is going to happen. Like, there's a lot of work and timeline and other things that are happening, and we are throwing away A at a time when it has spent a year going through various different governance proposals. And I don't think that I don't think it's good, but I don't think that there is enough positive community support to outweigh the negative community support in this current model. And I think probably what that highlights is that for things like crypto economic FIPS, we need to do we need a better process that's going to do a better job highlighting and assessing overall network benefits. And realistically, if folks are if we're not able to identify and get clear alignment on the overall parties, the way in which the network is going to benefit in the long term, I don't think we can overall move forward with the FIP in this current world. So I guess like the biggest delta here is like, in our current governance process, can we move forward with this FIP right now? And I just don't think we do have the soft consensus needed to accept this FIP. Again, I wouldn't say that a couple of dissident voices is here. I would say that there's like relatively neutral to negative perception in this across many communities. I haven't heard, maybe Deep was highlighting in the chat that across the Phil Plus community, there's neutral to positive support, which includes a number of the storage, a number of clients and folks who are working in that community. But again, I just haven't seen that participation. And from the position that we have to make right now, I just don't think that we can assess that soft consensus has been made across the community, and I don't think we can assess that soft consensus exists amongst the core dev community either in our assessment of whether this should be approved. Again, there might be more soft consensus and whether or not this is good for the network, but I think that the overall perception here, and again, if we can't reach a strong, unified, positive acceptance thing, I think we have to agree to reject this as not having consensus.
I agree with Molly. I think that's a perfect segue. As mentioned, I gave my personal beliefs on this as well. So I'll turn it over to Danny to see if, as sort of our arbiter, if he agrees. But I think that is the most appropriate path forward. I think that makes sense for the group that's assembled here today. And I think that we should confirm that the FIP is rejected and focus on all of the next steps that need to happen afterwards, not just in terms of crypto economics, but also in terms of governance.
Yeah. I'll keep this as short as I can. I mean, I think Molly described it very accurately. Soft consensus is deliberately high bar. It's designed to tend towards conservatism. It tends to aim for a very strong kind of precautionary principle. One of the places where it really struggles, and we're in that now, and I think many crypto economic FIPs will fit this pattern, is when it's unclear what the precautionary step is. Out of that A and B, which is the one which is the safer route, which is the conservative thing. And I think fundamentally one of the reasons we've struggled with consensus here is, as Tom says, there's a genuine disagreement about which one of these is a continuation on the path that Filecoin has always set out to be, which is to be a valuable storage network for humanity's information, and whether we're just continuing on that arc in a relatively conservative way to get that goal, or whether it's a radical change to the business models of some of our core stakeholders. I think that, just to touch on the governance, like I say, I've been in these discussions in other systems. I don't think we live in a political world, and it's perfectly possible to construct systems that understand that there are times when you have to flip that switch. We didn't build that necessarily into FIT1, and as Caitlin has said, FIT1 doesn't quite match what we do now either. So I think there are two things. One is that we should go back and think about how we build a governance process that can involve everybody, implementers, stakeholders, and the wider silent majority of our community, and work out how to do that. But at this moment in time, perhaps with some sadness, I'll have to say that this FIP 56 has not passed soft consensus.
All right, and without a great way to really segue out, I think, Lucky, we can move on to the next topic of conversation.
Thank you very much, Caitlin, and thank you very much, everyone, for engaging. We have additional presentation today, just one, Windows Post Grindability Fix by Nemo. Over to you.
Thank you, and please bear with me as we're shifting gears a little bit here. So I wanted to present the existing potential security weakness in the current window post that's deployed on mainnet, and address how we're resolving it with FIP 61, which is otherwise known as the window post grindability fix. So as a quick background, this is an issue that's been known for a while, actually since before mainnet was launched, and it's just been kind of an identified issue that's been hanging around since. The reason it hasn't been fixed to date is for a few reasons, but it was reviewed a while back and deemed possibly less of a security threat than we imagine. The potential attacks are arguably on the complicated side. But that being said, my team, Phil Crypto and CryptoNet Lab, did discuss this issue several times. And recently, we decided that it was in the best interest of the network to resolve it. And it should actually have a minimal impact on anyone that's honestly mining. And with FIP61, we're looking to deploy it as soon as possible. So what is the actual issue here? All right, these images are a little more complicated probably than they need to be, but the image on the left shows roughly how the current window post works today. At the top, we have some set of sealed sectors. When it's time to generate a window post, the service provider selects some subset of those sectors and places them in some sort of specific ordering or maybe random or whatever, but they do have control of the order of those sectors. The red box on the left at the top sort of illustrates that at the core is that is the problem. If a service provider can choose the ordering for the sectors in the window post, it's a problem because there does exist a relationship in how the challenges are selected based on that order. And because of that, if somebody were trying to sort of game their challenges, then they have some input to what those challenges are. So as an example, like a service provider could provide one set of sectors to a window post and generate the challenges and then inspect them and then see if they look favorable for whatever that means for that provider. And if they don't look favorable, they could reorder the sectors and or choose different sets of them and keep generating challenges sets until they find one that does look favorable for them. In that sense, this is grindability, where they can essentially just do this repeatedly until they have the challenges that they want. This is considered a protocol bug. We do not believe that it's being exploited actively, but that's one of those things that is very difficult to say. FIP61 resolves this, showing the image on the right. So what we're doing here is we are removing the dependency on how the challenges are generated based on the order. So instead, the fixed elements affecting the challenge generation are just the sector ID and the randomness from the chain, meaning that like it doesn't, I apologize, it doesn't really matter what the order of the sectors are in, the challenges are consistent. So this is closer, that was actually what was like originally intended with this. It just turned out that that was something that was overlooked in implementation at some point in time. And FIP61 resolves that. This is the summary, and I am here to discuss.
Thank you so much, Nemo. Are there questions or comments based on this? No.
Thanks, Nemo.
Okay.
If there's any negative, sorry, just quick, if there's any like negative implications of like, hey, we think that in some subset of cases it's gonna like cause some process to take longer, that's maybe the only relevant thing to like point out, just to make sure that we understand the cost of fixing this potential like abuse vector. But overall, like I think it's pretty non-controversial that none of us want anyone to be able to grind their window posts.
Thanks, Molly. All right, Jenny, do you want to take the stage now?
Now that we have a decision on SDM, I do think we have a final scope for the next network upgrade in V19. So I just want to quickly update the timeline and align the. Now we have Venus team and Forest team with us as well. I just want to quickly align on the timeline really quick. So as we speak, I updated this page and I want to thank Caitlin. This is all Caitlin. Thank you for being the network coordinator this time. And this work is from her. So this is the page that we're using for coordinating this network upgrade. I post a link in the Zoom chat. So based on everything being discussed, the final scope of the next network upgrade that's happening in May is going to be FIP42, which is increasing the max sector our commitment to 3.5 years, which will enable the deal duration to be the maximum deal duration to increase from 1.5 years to 3.5 years as well. We have a rejected SDM FIP sadly. We are gonna so FIP 47, which is the gas FIP for FEVM, and we are adding some batch balance parameter recalibration to just make sure the proof commit aggregation and pre-commit batch are still in the right range for the network. We are also including FIP 60, which is a big one. The title is like set the market deal maintenance interval to like 30 days, which means like the deal payout is moving from 1 day to 30 days. This is going to be dramatically helping the recent longer block validation time that we're seeing, because this is taking a lot of the crown usage in the market actor. Since NV18 upgrade, we are seeing more like community members, especially node operators, to reporting that they're observing longer block validation time that's impacting their syncing and stuff like that. So this is like a timely FIP that we want to include and ship to the network to mitigate any concerns. And we are going to be including the window post grindability fix that Nemo just presented, and we're doing like a small FEVM, EVM actor follow up just so that we can enable more like use case. The overall timeline is over here. So the calibration upgrade is targeted on the April the 18th. We are trying to target an earlier date instead of waiting, as I mentioned, because the crown issue, we do want to resolve that, mitigate that like sooner rather than later. So Forest and Venus, if you think this date is like challenging to you, do reach out to me. We can definitely like support and like, you know, collaborate on this a little bit more. Given that being said, the mainnet upgrade is gonna happen on May the 9th. It's gonna be NV19. I'm calling it Lightning, just because, you know, faster like block validation. It's really nice. I like that. So lightning speed, that's what we are aiming for. As you can see, there's actually a second network upgrade being scheduled a week after NV19. And that's because how we want to roll out the grindability fix into the network. So we want to do a quote unquote ghost upgrade. Where in the first network upgrade, the network will start to accept the window post that generated by the new proof, the red proof. And the second upgrade, the network will drop acceptance of the old proof upgrades to enforce the security of the network to be guarded by the new proof challenge. So this upgrade is going to happen again a week after the first upgrade. I don't expect any node operators and storage provider has to do any node update during this process. We are reserving 1 week just in case some storage provider needs more time to adapt the new proof challenge without getting penalized. I think that's it for now. Caitlin and I will be working on like an announcement, setting up the status page and communicate that with the broader community later on this week. Any questions? Yes, lightning first and thunder the later, inspired by a lightning thunder weather situation in Toronto yesterday. Perfect timing.
Thank you so much. Are there additional questions from anyone? Otherwise, I'll just take 2 minutes to remind us we still have, and we have piloted our community governance calls monthly. If you have not registered, please do so. I will include the link when I share around the notes for today's call. Again, if you have ideas, recommendations, anything that can help us improve the governance calls, do reach out to us. But the first thing, do also register to attend the CGC. That's the first step. I think I got caught out a bit. We can take additional questions if there are any. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, anyone? Okay. Thank you all so much for joining. It's been an interesting conversation, and we'll be preparing all the notes and the materials shortly after this call. Stay tuned for that. Register for a CGC coming up on the 24th of April. Otherwise, we are going to see again next month for Filecoin Codex call number 57. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.